Teamwork isn't just nice to have in business, it's the undisputed competitive advantage. When your team members work as a unified force, your whole operation benefits through higher productivity, thriving creativity, and unstoppable momentum. Welcome to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast, where we share with you strategies and tactics to help you develop game-changing teams so that you and your business can make a real difference in the world.
So welcome back to Impactful Teamwork. I'm your host, Julia Felton, and today we're diving into a topic that is crucial, yet in my opinion, often overlooked in business, and that is trust in the workplace. And I've really been prompted to record this episode because of a couple of things that have happened recently where I've really seen and experienced the power of a lack of trust and the power of amazing trust. And the difference that it can create in performance and outcome is just worlds apart. And we know from the work of Patrick Lencioni that trust is the number one thing that drives dysfunction in teams. So trust is the number one thing that stops a team operating effectively. And in my book, Unbridled Business, one of the key, I was going to say it's glue, but it's not really glue. It's trust I see as this kind of commodity. It greases everything that happens within the organization because without trust, everything falters. But when we've got great levels of trust, then everything operates seamlessly. And I guess it was a situation with my horses this week that really prompted me to think really deeply about this. I was with some clients and we were talking about relationships. And I guess because I'm with my horses every day, I really forget what a really strong, trusting relationship we have together. And they will pretty much do most things for me because they trust that I'm never going to put them in a situation that's going to be dangerous or harmful to them. And that's because I never have. I've always had a very respectful relationship with them. And so they always seem to go the extra mile for me to achieve what I want to achieve. And yet I think back when the ponies arrived, Bracken and Thistle, they were only about 9 months old at the time when I rescued them. And Bracken was absolutely terrified of everything, terrified of people, terrified of me, terrified of everyone around us. And I had to spend a lot of time investing in building relationships, building trust with that pony before I can even get close to her. This is why trust is so important, because it can make the difference between a high-performing team and a massively underperforming team. And yet, as leaders and managers, I think we just don't invest enough time in building these relationships and building trust with people. So I just want you to picture this example. Senior executives nowadays have become more skeptical of their C-suites. And middle managers are wary of their superiors. And there's also a general level of mistrust towards entry-level workers. So trust, it seems, is in short supply. And from the top down, the lack of trust is not just a discomfort, it's actually eroding the very fabric of organizational integrity. So why does it matter? As I said earlier on, it matters because when trust disappears, so does performance. And organizations with a trust deficit often find themselves struggling with engagement, productivity, and ultimately performance. So what can we do about this? I think it's really interesting because during COVID, a lot of firms and employees built trust up during COVID. And actually the statistics from the Edelman Barometer showed that during COVID, there were higher levels of trust in business than there were with the government. And I think what's interesting in the last couple of years is we've seen that changing, because today, many team members resent firms for laying off people and don't understand why bosses are tracking them in this remote world that many people are working in. In fact, according to a survey, only 67% of employees trust their employer. And that's a decline of 3% from 2022. And in another piece of research, 25% of US professionals said they didn't believe their employer trusted them. And I think from everything I see and talking and when I'm training managers and leaders, this is a theme that actually comes through quite strongly. Because I think many leaders have become frustrated with employees who they feel are consistently disengaged. Sometimes they balk at wanting to have to come into the office as the organization might be changing their return to work policy. Or in team members continually demanding bigger titles and higher pay. And this is a real problem, as I said, because this decline in trust can threaten an organization's reputation, productivity, and profitability. And we know that trust can be broken quickly, but it can take months or even years to rebuild. So what are the kind of behaviors that erode trust in the workplace? This is things like corporate politics, dishonesty, lack of transparency, and a company's failure to adhere to its own rules. And increasingly, this is really common. A number of team members that I've been training recently have been talking about the lip service senior management have been paying to things like diversity, things that senior leaders at the C-suite are saying, yes, we're doing, but actually their actions aren't indicating that. And that is causing a real lack of trust within those organizations. And the decline of trust, or the lack of it, actually, I think also weighs pretty heavily on the minds of executives in this really challenging environment. And I think this is because this lack of trust puts the firm's productivity, operational efficiency, and product quality at risk. And 40% of executives believe that. And 38% of senior executives feel that the lack of trust can threaten profitability. So what does that mean? It means a generalized lack of trust within the firm means it's going to underperform its potential. And I think it's really interesting because we've obviously got a situation nowadays where fewer people are working face to face. This water cooler moment, as I call them, when you're in the office, you're maybe grabbing a coffee, you're making your lunch, and you're able to have a conversation with somebody, really informal, off the record, and you find out what's going on. There's so much knowledge and information that's shared in those informal communications. And that's what can build trust, because you get to know what's going on for everybody else. But when we don't have these moments of truth in the office because they're all virtual, then that can cause challenges. So I think it's interesting to look at the evolution of trust in the workplace, because I think it's only become as critical as it is in recent years. Because at the start of the Industrial Revolution, and for a century afterwards, bosses led and workers followed. In those days, leaders felt no compulsion to explain anything, and workers rarely had a say in organizational decisions. But after World War II, company leaders realized that in achieving success, particularly in larger organizations, they needed to empower their team members. So they started rewarding team members for their trust and loyalty, giving people good pensions and opportunities for advancement. And for the main part, employees were willing to spend their entire careers working for organizations and bosses they trusted. And this era of mutual trust evolved again in the 80s and 90s, as forward-thinking bosses continued to empower their team members. And they made changes to company policy based on employee feedback. And organizations realized that employees who felt trusted and who could in turn trust their bosses were typically more engaged and productive than those who didn't. But this economic shift from the manufacturing to the service-orientated economy really changed a lot of this because it threw millions of people who believed they'd had a job for life out of work. Retirement programs were changed from final salary to contribution ones. I know that happened to me. And I think as a result of a number of the shifts going on, a number of either corporate downsizes or corporate mergers, people were just left to realize that they didn't really trust their employer. And I think that this has become a real challenge where we've got this lack of trust in the organizations. And in fact, I've witnessed this as well this week. I forgot about this example where at the place where I go and get all my food supplies for my horses, I discovered last week that it was closing down within 7 days. And I was shocked. The company have another store, probably about 10 miles away. So they've decided to consolidate all their operations in one place. But I really like going to my local feed store because I knew all the people there. They knew me. They could give me great advice, amazing customer service. But what upset me the most was the speed with which this transformation was happening, because speaking to people who worked in the store, they literally were notified on the Monday that the store was closing on the Sunday. And most of them would be giving anywhere, depending on their lengths of service, 2 to 4 weeks to close the store down and do all the stock takes once it's shut at the weekend and move on. It's really made me as a consumer really question that store. If that's the way it treats its team members, I'm really wondering and questioning now how it's treating me as a customer. Just a thought. So there's this ripple impact of trust, because it's not just with our team members, it can filter through to the customers and other shareholders and stakeholders within the business. So if leaders don't show they trust their team members, I think the team members can conclude, and in this case, the girls in the feed store can conclude, that their leaders probably aren't worth trusting. And I think when we often don't trust our bosses, that can lead to increased employee burnout as well. But the converse of this is also true. It's not only bosses that don't trust team members don't trust bosses, and also some of our team members give bosses few reasons to trust them. Remember recently we had the quiet quitting phenomenon where team members were effectively checking out of the office mentally. And many team members have felt resentful and balked at the return to work office policies that have been imposed upon them. Others we've heard of, and we've seen examples of people trying to exploit remote working options. But of course, there are isolated incidents of employee dishonesty and these workplace crackdowns, but it doesn't mean that all the trust is gone. And I think it is interesting that the Edelman statistics show that people still trust their employer more than governments or the media. But it doesn't take a lot for that trust to begin fraying. And when it does, then collaboration, innovation, and organizational effectiveness suffers. And in fact, it's this lack of trust that's a huge factor why so many team members feel disengaged at work. Because workers who feel that their bosses don't value their opinions can become less productive, less willing to collaborate, less innovative, and more willing to quit. And this disengagement is extremely expensive to the economy. Some estimates say it's costing us as much as $7.8 trillion US dollars a year in lost productivity. Astounding, isn't it? This situation where we lose trust and we don't value the people that we're working with can have such an economic consequence. So how do we lose trust? Leaders lose trust in their employees when employees are embarrass other co-workers, or they steal the credit for other people's work, when they flout the office requirements, they make frequent mistakes, they're not doing what they say they'll do, or they were not responding to questions in a reasonable amount of time. Whereas leaders can lose employees' trust by showing favoritism for certain team members over others based on something particularly other than their performance. Changing policies frequently or withholding critical information about changes. How about not giving team members autonomy and flexibility in how they do their job? Not asking for input or feedback, and not following through on commitments. Successful trust building revolves in part around bosses making employees feel confident of their support. It involves being transparent and holding yourself and others accountable for their words and actions. And this is really interesting because it might mean that a leader needs to keep a promise, even if that becomes financially inconvenient. I think another really important thing when we're building trust is particularly in this remote environment in which many people are working, is we need to start focusing less on monitoring activities and more on outputs. And from a team member side, it starts with trusting that the company leaders are not going to get them out, and that leaders should reward integrity and accountability. We need to have candid conversations with people, even if it makes us feel vulnerable. And we need to figure out the best way to communicate with one another, using the medium that is most appropriate for that person. Because we all know that different types of people prefer different styles of communication. For some people, they will want you to sit down and have a conversation with them. For other people, a short, sharp email might suffice. But above all, as leaders, we need to be willing to listen, and team members need to be willing to express their concerns. If we can't open up some honest dialogue within the workplace, then we are never, ever going to build trust effectively. And some statistics that I'd also love to share with you is less than 30% of people don't feel trusted by their bosses. Less than 30%. Wow, I think that's a really incredible statistic. And when we look at different levels within the organization, only 45% of C-suite colleagues have a great deal of trust in their employees. Management below the C-suite is 53 and experienced staff is 50, but entry-level staff is only 38%. As managers and leaders, we need to foster this environment where we create this psychological safety to create trust in the workplace. Because without this trust, nothing is going to work effectively. My question to you this week is, what are you doing to improve the levels of trust in your organization? And this starts with you as the leader walking the talk and engaging honestly with each other. With my pony Bracken, when she first came to me, remember I said she was terrified of people and I had to build trust with her. The way I built trust with her was literally by just hanging out with her. In the horse world, horses do two things. They hang out together doing something and doing nothing. I hung out with Bracken doing nothing. No expectation, no requirement from her. I just spent time hanging out with her. And the problem is that in the workplace, we always spend time hanging out doing something. We've always got a deadline or a project to meet. But trust is built in these times of hanging out together doing nothing. Spending time getting to know each other with no expectation of what might happen. And I did this for many months with Bracken. I just sat with her and eventually she felt brave enough to come over to me and we started then to have a dialogue. But I had to be very fastidious in my actions. I had to be very aware that I didn't break that trust all of a sudden by doing something that would scare her so that she would run away. Your team members, it's not going to be as challenging as it was for me to build trust with Bracken, but it is going to take time. It does mean that as leaders, we need to spend some time consciously building these relationships within the workplace. Because what we know to be true is that the better the internal relationships that you have with people within the organization, the more influential you can be, and the more likely you are to be able to get other people to collaborate and partner and work with you in order to get the results that you want within the workplace. I'd love to hear from you this week. What are you doing to build trust in your workplace? And if you don't have any conscious procedures or actions in place, what can you put in place to consciously think about how you can build trust with your team members? And I'd also love to hear of any of you that are maybe struggling with a lack of trust in your organizations. And let's brainstorm some ideas on how you can improve that. Because as I said, without a lack of trust, there is always disharmony and discord within the organization. And what we really want is an organization based on harmony, health, and unity, just like the horse herd has. So there are my ruminations this week on how to create trust and build confidence in the workplace. I hope you found it useful as usual. And I'd love to hear from you if you've got any thoughts on what you can do or how you are doing building trust in your workplaces. Okay, have an amazing week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast. Please stay tuned for future episodes and do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on your favourite platform. Recommendations are essential for attracting new listeners. Please follow us on social media at Julia Felton and at Business Horsepower. And if there are any topics you'd like us to cover on future episodes, please do let me know. Remember, you and your team are always making an impact. What impact will you make today?